السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ده section Governmental Accounting، جزء أستاذ دكتور الجبالي، second year English section all groups، تقديم ريهام محمد صفوت. In the last video I have explained the first two types of governmental transactions, current payment and current collection transactions, and in this video we will continue with governmental interest and investment transactions. Accounting for governmental interest. We have two types of governmental interest, temporary interest and permanent interest. I'll start with temporary interest. Mainly the temporary interest is established for a certain reason, and when allowing for the temporary interest, the entry would be on the debit side, budget spending for temporary interest, on the credit side, spending covered by temporary interest. And when the amount of checks are collected from the central bank, the entry would be amount for temporary interest on the debit side and on the credit side central bank. And when using the interest and paying the expenses, the entry would be spending covered by temporary interest and amount for temporary interests. While if the interest is not used and returned, the entry would be cash collected under settlement and on the credit side rejected spending of the budget. And we will continue with the following entry: budget spending for temporary interest, on the credit side spending covered by temporary interests. Second, permanent interest. The process of establishing the permanent interest has two steps. The first is the payment of the amount of the permanent interest by checks, and the second, substituting the used part of the permanent interest. Here the entry would be budget spending permanent interest, checks, current credit amount under settlement. And if we need to increase the amount of the permanent interest, the same entry would be budget spending permanent interest, checks, current credit amount under settlement. And in the case of decreasing the amount of permanent interest, the entry would be collected cash under settlement and permanent interest on the credit side. And in the case of changing the person of the permanent interest, the entry would be permanent interest new person, the debit side, on the credit side permanent interest old person. And when closing the permanent interest at the end of the year, the entry would be budget spending permanent interest on the credit side, cash collected under settlement, and the current credit amount under settlement. Accounting for investment transactions. When taking the permission from the National Bank of Investment to specify the fund in the account of the governmental entity, the entry would be National Bank of Investment and Central Bank, and on the credit side current credit amount under settlement. And when completing the investment project and paying within the same year, the required entry is investment spending, and on the credit side checks and discount. And when collecting the National Bank of Investment checks, the entry would be checks and the National Bank of Investment at the central bank. With regard to the discounted amounts, they are grouped at the central bank, and the central bank subtracts them from the accounts of the governmental units and pay them to beneficiaries, and the entry here is central bank, National Bank of Investment. And when paying this discount by the central bank to beneficiaries, the entry is discount and checks, and at the end of the project, when the assets are generated, the entry is assets general fund invested in assets. Here we have a second case if the investment project is completed but its cost is not paid until the end of the year. Here the entry would be investment spending and current investment spending payable. Then current credit amount under settlement and investment returns. And when recording the assets, the entry is asset general fund invested in assets. And in the next year, when paying the payable amount, the entry would be current investment spending payable, and on the credit side checks and discounts. And when transferring the discount from the National Bank of Investment to the central bank, the entry would be central bank, on the credit side National Bank of Investment. Exercises. Exercise 1, page 151. The required is preparing the journal entries for the following transactions. The first transaction is the collection of 100,000 checks, the entry would be checks under collection 100,000 and revenue 100,000. The second is transferring permanent interest amounted to 1,000 from A to B. The entry would be permanent interest new person A 1,000 and permanent interest old person B 1,000. C. A temporary interest amounted to 900 is given to C. The entry would be budget spending for temporary interest 900 and spending covered by temporary interests 900. D. The National Bank of Investment allocated 100,000 in the account of the governmental entity at the central bank for the new project. The entry would be National Bank of Investment and Central Bank 100,000 and the current credit amount under settlement 100,000. Exercise 2. A. Issuing check to cover investment spending. The entry would be investment spending and checks with 1 million. B. A check sent to tax authority to cover the amount of previous transactions. The entry would be current credit amount under settlement, tax authority, and checks. C. Substituting 300 permanent interest and increasing the amount of permanent interest by 200. The entry would be budget spending permanent interest 500 and on the credit side checks current credit amount under settlement by 500. And when the amount of checks are collected from the central bank, the entry would be amount for temporary interest on the debit side and on the credit side central bank. And when using the interest and paying the expenses, the entry would be spending covered by temporary interest and amount for temporary interests. While if the interest is not used and returned, the entry would be cash collected under settlement and on the credit side rejected spending of the budget. And we will continue with the following entry: budget spending for temporary interest, on the credit side spending covered by temporary interests. Exercise 3, page 152. A. Receiving a check of 20,000 revenue for the month. The entry is check under collection 20,000 and revenue 20,000. B. A check of 10,000 issued to cover investment spending. The entry is investment spending 10,000, checks and discounts 10,000. C. A new check was issued to substitute old check of 1,000. The entry is check old 1,000, check new 1,000. D. A document presented to substitute the spending of permanent interest of 300 and a check to cover the previous spending and to increase the amount of interest by additional 400. The entry is budget spending permanent interest 700, checks and the current credit amount under settlement 700. E. Checks were issued to cover wages by 12,000 and by 3,000 to cover taxes to tax authority. The entry would be current spending 15,000, checks 12,000, current credit amount under settlement 3,000. I wish you all fine and please view Dr. الجبالي lectures related to the governmental accounting and solve the required assignments. Good luck.